podcast excellence since 2005. This is the King of Podcasts radio network, kingofpodcasts.com.
So the California government has made a deal with Google to help out with their AI to help local journalism. How do you think that deal's going to work out?
The King of Podcasts radio network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Welcome to the episode number 349 of the Broadcasters Podcast. This is King of Podcasts here with you. Website is kingofpodcasts.com. Thank you for listening to the show every week. Finding it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, iHeartRadio, among other places. And of course, from the website alone, kingofpodcasts.com, where all of my other programming is also located. But I know that some of you really do appreciate checking out this program, and I appreciate all of you for coming in and checking out the show with me this week. We're not going to talk about Diddy. Okay. If you want to read anything about the whole Diddy story, because of course, when I do this program, you might think King of Podcasts, this is one of those stories you would talk about, right? No, not this time. No. I am not going to talk about Diddy. I'm just not. I already did. And I don't feel like I need to go into any more detail about what a scumbag he is. So, you know what? Let him just rot in hell. I could care less. If you want me to go ahead and bring up anything about what happened when it comes to Diddy, I spoke about it on the Broadcasters Podcast, episode 304, back in November 2023. They should have done things to him then. Why did it take another 10 months to get to this now? They could have done this at any time. But, you know, I'm not going to get myself caught up in that and talk about it because, you know what, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't make much of a difference. I reported him, and also the period of the debaucheries. I talked about him when he got his house raided in Miami and LA. Look, they've been going on this for years. At any time they could have gotten him. Now it's time. Let them do what they're going to do. I got other things to go and worry about. But we're going to talk about a story that we actually brought up on the program last year. Matter of fact, we've talked about tech AI for a while now. And I've been talking about all this year that the new deals that Google or OpenAI with ChatGPT, Google, Gemini, ChatGPT, okay, all the AI programs that are out there, they're making deals with publishers. And they're getting access to those publishers' archives and also helping to write some of their content. And we know that eventually, because of the advance that they're giving these companies to kind of stay afloat, it's giving the AI companies enough time for them to go ahead and let these companies continue to go ahead and dwindle down to nothing, to where their IP will be next to nothing at the end of the day. And then these companies are just going to buy up the intellectual property, what is left of the carcasses of these publishers. They'll buy the brands, the websites, the domains, whatever it is, the intellectual property and the archives for nothing. And then they'll take it for themselves. It's the eventual course of action that's going to happen anyway. And we have talked about where the thought about codes that were put out there. Remember, we heard a whole thing about Australia trying to do bargaining codes, right? With the likes of OpenAI and others to try to get money back for these companies because the publishers thought they were due. In the digital disruption, as we know, there are already things that are being done to try to go ahead and go after the fact that these legacy publishers, these newspapers, magazines, and news organizations in general, they're losing circulation, they're losing ad revenue. So the legacy media out there, the media establishment, they've tried to do some things where, well, let's get the government to go ahead and make them pay us. And one of the best examples we had out there is a failed attempt by the Australian government, their bargaining code. The News, Media, and Digital Platforms Mandatory Bargaining Code, which was originally designed to address the imbalance between news publishers and major digital platforms like Google and Facebook. It was introduced in 2021 to make tech companies pay news organizations for the use of their content, especially considering the loss of ad revenue that traditional media outlets had suffered due to the dominance of these platforms in digital advertising. And as AI companies began growing and the tools were being increasingly used to aggregate and summarize news content, the discussions emerged, and we've talked about it now, current day, about extending a similar framework to artificial intelligence companies, and that AI systems were training on vast amounts of content, including news articles, potentially devaluing journalism further, as users might rely on AI-generated summaries instead of visiting publishers' websites, reducing ad revenue. Well, now that the GPT programs, these AI programs are starting to get so well advanced. Now it's a matter where the publishers realize the jig is up. The sands of the hourglass are starting to dwindle, and their time is running out. So for them to go and stay alive, they have to do something to make these publishers stop their momentum. And so what happened was the Australian government tried to go and use this bargaining code, the mandatory bargaining code. And they included mandatory negotiations, an arbitration, or transparency. But this has also been trying to be applied in Canada as well, a broader global conversation about how to ensure content creators like news publishers are compensated fairly as AI becomes more integrated into content consumption. They're trying to use whatever tools at disposal. So government intimidation. They think the tech AI companies are going to be intimidated by the government. Well, they said, fuck you. A big middle finger. Because when Facebook was being addressed with this, or when Google was being addressed with this, what did Google do? We'll just drop out. We don't need Australia. Forget about it. So when we see that Australia try to put this method of intimidation to try to go ahead and force these tech AI companies, listen, they weren't, I'm going to be of the argument that I don't think they're trying to take away from the links. The thing is, they still need to go ahead and link to the articles. And as far as I know, when I look at ChatGPT or Google Gemini to look at articles or find information or research, they still give me links. If I want more context, I need to go through those links. But of course, the argument is right now is that with Gemini or with ChatGPT, that they're saying that there's enough information being provided by the AI platform that the publishers and what they're writing are going to be no longer warranted, which means we're not going to go to your crummy websites with your big fat paywalls or your pop-ups landing all over the page or your AI generated stories where the real valuable part of the story is not until you have reached 50 million pop-up ads and more to get to the actual meat of the story that you want. I can't tell you how many times I see that more often now. AI generated stories, and it's like it reads like an AI article. It's fluff, fluff, fluff. Nothing's going on. No who, what, when, where, and why. Nothing. All the way down to the bottom. So I can catch that. One thing I want to go and read. Clickbait. It's not even clickbait. It's a rabbit hole. I don't want rabbit holes. We are we want to be easily gratified. We want to be able to go and find things fast. That's what the internet's for. But these publishers are making it much harder for us because they're trying to make money off of us. Understood. But you're not making your subscriptions that available or that reasonably priced. And part of it is that we also like to go to search results and go to AI platforms because it's easier to gather the information. Because some of these publishers are not one-stop shops. And the other thing, too, is that because of the methods that the corporate media establishment do right now to report on stories, there's a reason why there's a trust in the media problem right now where roughly, 90% or so of people do not trust the media. And they don't trust to go and get stories from them. To where major, official news story outlets like AP and Reuters and UPI, they're also being questioned, too. They are under scrutiny constantly. So what happens then? Instead, California decides to go ahead and build out a deal, a new arrangement with Google. They're locally located, right? And they said, okay, let's go and do this. So Google is going to work on a public-private partnership. It's aimed at supporting local journalism and AI research in the state. So here's what you need to know about it. The partnership, Google will be forking out over $300 million over the next 5 years. Roughly $110 million will come from Google. $70 million will be from the state budget to boost journalism jobs. And Google will also kick in an additional $70 million to fund the AI research program. So there we go. The plan is to go ahead and give this money in to go and help local journalism, and they're set. The purposes that are going to be focused on, there will be a fund that will be managed by UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism, supporting local news organizations, excluding broadcasters in the state of California, and an AI Innovation Accelerator, which will focus on developing AI tools to help solve real-world problems. Specifics of the program are still being finalized. Now, there are mixed reactions we're going to talk about here on the show, but supporters are saying it's a crucial step in addressing the decline of local journalism and promoting innovation. And there are critics that say, well, this is not enough. You're not getting what you should be getting. And these are the people that want the bargaining code here, that of politicians of Congress federally that have actually presented bills to create the bargaining code, to replicate the bargaining code that Australia and Canada have made prior. And then some journalists also fear that the focus on AI could lead to job losses in the industry. Well, look, you're not going to be journalists anymore. You're going to be data providers. You're going to be data entry. You're going to be finding information raw and putting that input into the machine. That's what you're going to be doing. The machine, it'll be like Johnny Five in Short Circuit. Johnny Five will read input and he'll find out and he'll know everything that you need to know and be programmed and understand it and have feelings, input, right? It's a very old reference. So now let's talk about where it comes off this. First of all, there was CBS News that talks about this and saying that what is being done right now is that the deal is not a tax. But there was a bill that was originally proposed, right? Here's the thing. You're not going to get the bill to be done. You're not going to be able to get a bill and force and intimidate to get Facebook or Google to do something about this. That's what they're not going to get to do. So no choice there. And there are people that are saying that Google got off easily. As news organizations, they say here, move from primarily print to mostly digital, they have increasingly relied on Google and Facebook to distribute this content. While publishers see their advertising revenues nosedive significantly in the last few decades, Google's search engine has become a hub of a digital advertisement empire that generates more than $200 billion annually. Well, it's not their fault. They need to make money too. And they provide more information, a wider range of information, very well organized and cataloged. The truth is, the publishers never did a good job of laying out or presenting their content like they could when it was print. And that's the problem, is that they want to have the print. They want to have print media like it was before. Because these companies were never built to be made to be digital media. Their content still matters. Of course it does. But you're not going to make these companies pay a bill. They've already proven, the tech companies already know they have the leverage. And that's it. As a result, newspapers like the LA Times have been losing up to $40 million a year, and the owners justifying a layoff of more than 100 people earlier this year. We reported on that. More than 2,500 newspapers have closed since 2005, and about 200 countries across the U.S. do not have any local news outlets, according to a report from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. Well, of the media that is legacy, the traditional linear media that we have out there, newspapers and magazines are the first to go extinct. We already see that right now, because that's what happened. The internet made it possible. And when things can be put up there and posted, then it just makes it easier. And because these companies were blind to the fact of this, they didn't decide to go ahead and make their platforms on digital be more affordable. They forced customers to continue to hold on to their print subscriptions while giving them digital access or charging an extra fee. parallel revenue plans. And they still can't figure out what to do. And no matter what kind of deals that you can make, like right now I had Palm Beach Post that tried to offer me 99 cents for the whole year. Yeah, they want you to forget so they can go ahead and ding you for your credit card afterwards. It's that kind of plan. And I'm not going to do that. Of course, they want to get you also involved to make you realize, oh, you know what? I really do like reading the Post. And I do. I like their articles, but they cost too much. My father used to go ahead and order the Post, but then they kept charging the price up too much. He was just paying, $100 a year, I think, for 52 weeks, including the Sunday paper. And then we had to go in, then he started changing it to go and get it every couple of days to where eventually, $250, $300 for the year was too much for the paper. And he's like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And I can tell you for a fact, I don't think anybody gets newspaper delivery at all, because I don't think anybody gets that anymore. But that used to be a thing, the paper being dropped off at your doorstep in the morning. That doesn't happen anymore. Hotels used to get USA Today. They don't get that anymore. No. So there was a bill that was originally proposed, the Wicks bill, and it was going to impose a link tax requiring companies like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft to pay a certain percentage of advertising revenue to media companies for linking to their content. And it was modeled after a policy that Canada required Google to pay roughly $74 million per year to fund journalism. But yeah, taxing them. This is a deal with them, right? And they're doing something for the good. So Google was having to negotiate a deal, but you're not going to make them go ahead and get caught up into a tax. So for 2 years, tech companies were fighting and obviously lobbying to not have this bill happen, which would have been launching expensive opposition campaigns and running ads attacking the legislation. Google threatened to temporarily block news websites from some California users' search results. And the bill had continued to advance with bipartisan support until this week. So this is the compromise. And what was being said was that there was no more path to forward the bill and the funding through the deal they're making now is better than zero. So Google has been using this, they say, as a playbook across the world to avoid regulations. And why shouldn't they? It's not, listen, you got to put some of the onus, some of the blame has to go on these publishers. It's their problem for not being on top of this. They failed themselves. I mean, for journalists that are out there, look, these are all owned by big corporations. Remember, you have all these deregulated companies. You had, again, 2,500 newspapers, but again, they were all being bought up by other companies. Big corporations were buying all these local newspapers and dropping them and discontinuing them. Do we hear that in the story? No one's talking about that, but it is. That's exactly what happened. They talked to Anya Schifrin, a Columbia University professor studying global media, and is co-authoring a working paper on how much Google and Meta owes to news publishers. She says, so, quote, what they are doing is using a whole lot of different tactics to kill bills that will require them to compensate publishers fairly. Yeah, they're not going to kowtow to intimidation. What's going to happen is they're going to make their money, and no one else can do anything about it because they were the smarter company, because they saw a wrinkle, they saw a loophole in the system. I mean, for all these years, Google at the same time can also say, well, how are people getting to your stories if not for our search results? In turn, we are helping you out. And that is the argument. But it's because the publishers are coming in from a position of weakness. They have to ask for money back because they can't afford. Google has the money, the lawyers, the power to go ahead and fight off any bills. The lobbying, lobbying leverage, whatever they need. Those big tech AI companies, they can afford to go and fight everything off. And then take this move here, and it looks good. Better than nothing, right? But this is the whole point. And then if they're not doing this, they've been making individual deals with other publishers of various magazines or whatever newspapers that they own. And then what they're doing, we've talked about that extensively, that they give them a deal for a certain amount of time. And at the same time, these AI companies are able to go ahead and access the archives, all the archives of all these different companies. So if you want to get all the archives of Billboard, or New York Times, or New York Post, or Daily Mail, they can go back and go as far as they want. Digitize all of it. Have it where all that information is available in the AI. And then eventually, they will already have what they need. And they will have what they need to go ahead and continue to go ahead and write stories just like those publications can do. And when those publications are at the point of extinction, because they have nothing else left, they have no way of continuing, then time to buy them on pennies on a dollar. Pennies on the dollar. You think I'm wrong? Do you think this is too far-fetched? No. Believe me, it's going to happen. I warned you about it. I talked about it. So some of the blowback that's also going on right now is the Media Guild of the West, a union that represents journalists in Southern California, Arizona, and Texas. They were locked out of the conversation. They were championing a bill that was trying to be put in, but were not included in the negotiations. You're not going to win. The government is not going to be able to stop them unless they try to outlaw them from coming in. But you're going to outrage the people if they can't access Google or Facebook or whatever. That's the part. At the same time, there are other organizations that are supporting this idea. That's California News Publishers Association, the local independent online news publishers, and California Black Media. The agreement is scheduled to take effect next year with $100 million to kickstart the efforts. Governor Gavin Newsom is promising to include the journalism funding as part of the January budget, but there are concerns that there could be wrenches thrown in the plan, that this plan might not be able to go forward. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but we'll figure out how it's going to be. Now, as we heard about this a while ago when this was first being proposed, Google making the deal, publishers were calling it a first step. Now, to give you some context from the localnewsmatters.org website, they actually talked about what Google was doing in the last 18 months to make sure the bill couldn't make it through. The bill that was being introduced by Oakland Democratic Assembly member Buffy Wicks in February 2023, that's the bill they were trying to do to negotiate with news outlets for the news content to pay a fee or negotiate. And what Google did was they spent more than $2 million lobbying lawmakers against those bills and others, more than triple than what it spent in the same time period 2 years earlier, according to a Cal Matters review. And there was a second bill that was being introduced this past February by Orinda Democratic Senator Steve Glazier, which would have imposed a fee on major tech platforms to provide news outlets a tax credit to employ local journalists. And they said the measure would have raised about $500 million a year. But that's not going to happen either, because they couldn't get the votes needed, because they were probably bought by Google. Now, some of the things as to why Google chose to go and work with paying this new UC Berkeley fund, tech companies succeeded in killing the bills they opposed while appeasing both legacy print media and some digital-only news outlets with 5 years of support. Now, what Google did in France more than a decade ago is they created a digital publishing innovation fund when publishers there pushed for regulations. Even 10 years ago, they were trying to do that. But it's just happening to go ahead and get here once AI came into play. Once AI came in, game changer. So all these companies at such a at the last minute, they're trying to save their ass. And that's what they're doing right now. Now, once this agreement was being put into play, the San Francisco Standard actually wrote a story, an op-ed piece, talking about Google's deal with publishers shows how to meet AI with innovation, not red tape. And that's the thing that needs to be understood right here, is that to respond to advances in technology through optimism and growth rather than fear and contraction. Right. No intimidation. You're going to have to, you can't stop them, so they get in the bed with them. And in some way, it does kind of help out. So let's go into the story what they're talking about here, where over the past few years, technologists have shown a willingness to exit the state en masse in response to new taxes and regulation. And because of that, some of the tech companies that would have been in part of downtown San Francisco, those areas are now once largely empty and the city faces a budget crisis. Because there's a lot of things that happen here where newspapers, media companies, and all this, a lot of offices being shut down, a lot of resources being taken away. But remember this too. I mean, think of all the journalists that have been fired or let go or laid off or furloughed because of the big corporate giants that are out there and how they mismanaged all these publications. They could have still kept cranking out good information and found a way to continue to get revenue. But you didn't do anything to help continue to build on the quality to go ahead and hold on to people. Instead, you gave everybody a reason to leave. And that's what happened. The sheer number of jobs threatened by AI dwarfs even the largest fines that tech companies could pay. And traditional journalism is not equipped to overshadow the vast amount of written content that can be generated and widely distributed by small teams using advanced technologies. To thrive, journalists will need to find sustainable business models that capture the attention of paying customers. Or realize that journalism as a career, as a profession, is evolving. There still needs to be somebody, once again, that has to go ahead and incorporate input into these systems. The computers can't do it by itself. Somebody still has to feed the information in there. That's still a point. So there's fact gathering. There's information gathering. There's reference building. Where you can still get that information. And you can still pay well for that. And you still got out there and do something about it. The editor-in-chief of Business Insider, when he was there, Nicholas Carson, he says that, quote, "I think generative AI such as ChatGPT can make us faster and better." This writer here says, as a former journalist who now researches psychedelic policy and other matters, I've used AI to quickly transcribe large volumes of bureaucratic state meetings. It has saved me hours of work. I also programmed a script using OpenAI's ChatGPT language model that would summarize background information trained on my writing style and topic expertise. AI completes the tedious aspects of my job while I focus on original reporting and analysis. I'm able to publish high-quality information more quickly. And California's journalism program right here is a template for how the government can respond to AI in many aspects of society. Law enforcement and security firms could develop cybersecurity tools. Healthcare providers and hospitals could counter medical misinformation. There was an argument that was made by MIT's Eric Brynjolfsson, making it that how to deal with technological challenges, race with the machine through cooperation rather than rage against it through restrictions. And that's exactly what they came up from here. Greg Ferenstein wrote this here and makes a great point. Now, the response from the journalism industry as a whole are commenting about this. The Columbia Journalism Review, they say that AI companies have a news problem, and journalists have the skills they need to fix it. Annika Collier-Navaroli writes the story and says that there are issues where ChatGPT and other of these AI platforms are not completely updated, and that there is some rumor and misinformation that can be put in here without going into politics or other details. And the problem occurs because most chatbots rely on months-old training data and do not have instant access to breaking news. Without that access in critical moments, people are turning away from chatbots and turning to other technologies like Google Search, which is experimenting with its own AI features. So OpenAI, we talked about, they have built out SearchGPT, which will meld this chatbot with immediate internet search results, making it clear to fill the gap in the race to make generative AI the most dominant technology on our planet, and companies now have a new battleground for access to real-time news. Right. The search results will become now something that can be AI generated. We're going to get to that point where we're going to get everything that we need from the search results without having to go to the actual search results themselves and click right through. So here's the argument. How does a chatbot determine what new information on the internet is reliable enough to relay? It doesn't. In reality, AI follows instructions based on policies created by people inside a company's tasked with solving the answers to this question. Now, AI companies currently are taking a page out of the social media chapter on emerging technology and journalism. As we enter the age of the AI, this writer says, there's a pivotal window of opportunity for companies to avoid repeating mistakes, and that AI companies should not only start hiring more people with journalism training, but respecting and empowering them such as that they can meaningfully contribute to the shaping of these nascent policies. Well, look, Why do you think they're making deals with these publishers? Because they're going to work directly with the journalists. They're going to take that information. Again, they're going to still work with the journalists. All these writers are still going to be contributing, but this is going to be fed into the AI. They don't need to go ahead. These companies don't need to go ahead and have the writers. This is where the other part's confounded. See, the publishers, the journalists think, oh, well, you need to go ahead and hire us at your companies. But Google and Facebook are not going to do that. ChatGPT is not going to do that. They don't need to hire journalists. They can pick them up as freelancers just like everybody else can. See, this is smart. I mean, don't get me wrong. I get exactly where Annika's trying to go here. Oh, yeah. AI companies, why don't you go and hire us? Hire us. We can take care of it for you. But the thing is that it's still important to go ahead and create with the reputation that's already beholden by these publishers. Like, there's something to be said about, you want to talk about music chart news that I always get on the regular basis? Well, I still want it to come from Billboard. It's a trusted source. If I get something that says it's from the New York Times, a trusted source. You think I'm going to go and read a story that's going to be from ChatGPT and it's not necessarily a source I'm used to? Like, one thing is we do like to get to know where our news comes from, who the byline is, and where is it coming from. So there's something to be said about that. So right now, AI companies have been making deals with news outlets to gain access to reporting. We talked about already OpenAI announcing the deal with Condé Nast, inking contracts with institutions like the Financial Times, the Associated Press, the Atlantic. After facing allegations of plagiarism, Perplexity AI also announced revenue-sharing deals with publishers like Fortune, Time, and the Texas Tribune for the use of their content. They make a point about how content of news outlets are both rich in both facts and verified knowledge, which means that's why you don't go ahead and have somebody go ahead and work for the tech company. You want the levers of quality assurance, compliance, you want that to be still done by the publisher. Let that system go into play. Because eventually, once that's done, and these algorithms, the machine learning is done to where mistakes are very little, and they could be controlled and proofread from the internal level of the tech companies, then they don't need these other companies to do anything. They'll learn the language, they'll learn the model, they'll learn the presentation, they'll have all this information in their disposal, and then all they'll need is just people to go and input. That's it. Research, gather, hunt, and that's it. Today's AI arms race for news is occurring in an even more fractured information environment. And yet the same questions remain and lie ahead for the people working inside of AI companies. It is imperative, she says, that companies learn from history and don't just follow the same playbook with the same people expecting different results. As generative AI barrels forward, tech companies should hire and recognize the skill set of those best positioned to tackle these inquiries and write the policies to help make these decisions about news. But the tech companies are not in the business of being news companies. They're information companies. So they're going to go and separate the news gatherers from the tech platform. Because what they are actually doing, which I actually think is smart, is that there's an objectivity by keeping at bay these journalists. Because we don't need the journalists to have any biases they have or any kind of access to go ahead and say, okay, we need to go ahead and report this. We need to add this into the system, but not this. No, keep it completely objective. Whatever goes in there is whatever goes in there. Freedom of information. You might not like that. Of course, there might be misinformation, disinformation that everybody can go and be concerned about. Of course there is. But you don't need the tech police. You don't need the tech companies to be a police. We don't need information police. We don't need a ministry of truth. We don't need any of that. The tech companies can go and do what they're going to do. You want to control what's going in? Then again, the story here says, well, it's all about trusting the outlets that you're getting the news from. Well, that's up to the reader. That's up to the readers. That's not up to you, journalists. Okay? You have your companies. You have your betters, your corporate bosses that choose to go ahead and present information. They might want to offer a political slant to it. Well, that's their choice. They want to skew between news and opinion editorial. That's their choice too. But you're not going to make the tech companies go ahead and hire you to create that kind of bias. They're not going to hire you to do that. They can keep you outside. And the thing is, too, is that, do you think that these tech companies are going to want to deal with you all being unionized and trying to create unionization in their tech companies? No. They don't want that either. So the tech companies, they can do these public-private partnerships. Google can do this all they want, and I understand what they're doing. I get why. But a lot of things happen under corporate control. They are at a position of weakness right now. There's nothing they can do about it. They can't get help from the government because these companies are too big. You can go ahead and antitrust all you want. You can try to break them down, break them up, whatever you're trying to do. But AI now has scared these people. But journalism will still have a role. Independent journalism can still have a role. There can still be local journalism. I mean, it's not as if these companies can't just go ahead and add more money and resources to what they have, but they're all in debt. Just like radio stations. But they could find a new purpose. Maybe they don't have to go and be existing as print outlets anymore because it's antiquated. But it doesn't mean that you can't continue to do a digital service and make the sites better. And not throw all these different bells and whistles, paywalls that people just hate. Because there's still something to be said about wanting to be able to go and read and enjoy what we see on the web. We want to be able to go and see the newspapers and look at everything that is in a different layout and still read the information that we want. But these companies make it very difficult. Publishers make it extremely difficult because they are desperate. Their desperation, just look at their websites. Look at the amount of ads you're going to get passed through. I mean, for me, I just hope that my universal blocker works. They're going to get past these sites so I can read something. Because you know what's more annoying than anything else? Is if I go to Google News right now and I try to look for stories and I am bombarded with pop-up ads. And all these things are going to try to deviate me off the story that I want to try to read. And it's so much to try to work around. And that's not even counting these stories that you have on there that are kind of like clickbait, that if you click on it, something happens and it's like, some weird story that comes off in a little box. And you don't know what you're going and clicking into. The story closes out that generative AI's break into the news business doesn't have to be an existential threat, but it is. It is, Annika. Rather, it can be an opportunity for a new pathway for trained journalists and journalism schools to use their unique skill set to help shape how information flows with the next generation of technology. Well, what they need to do is that soon enough, the tech companies will do enough to control the intellectual property of all these past corporate outlets, because they will also go extinct. But they will continue on and thrive with the tech companies operating it, and without the help of everybody else. I can't feel bad for these people and what happened to them. I can't. It's not my fault. But journalism students and journalism people, they are upset. They don't want this to go on. I'm taking it from the Syracuse Orange and their website back in April, or also from this week, an op-ed about AI has no place in academia or journalism. Autumn Clark writes this story. And even when I go to this website, there's pop-ups, there's Google ads all over the place. Of course, they need to make their money, but again, this is all this stuff that's going on. I got a universal blocker, and I can't stop this stuff. I got Amazon ads all over the place. For Airheads, for whatever reason. I don't know why. So for the past few years, journalists and students alike have been affected by the increasing abilities and presence of AI. We need to turn away from the use of auto-generated answers and instead work to reclaim our skills to write and read authentically. You can still write and read authentically, but if you want to go ahead and use anything now, people are going to want to use AI for it. I mean, there is something to be said about you can't rely on AI for everything. It still needs human input. It still needs certain things that human input can provide. People just can't use it to plagiarize whatever they want or do something else. They can't do that. It just doesn't work that way. So this writer talks about the use of generative AI raises concerns about the ethical implications of using AI in journalism and journalism education. Well, young lady, I mean, if you don't see that the corporate companies that you might want to get employed by, they screwed this up. They were not prepared for this. I mean, part of it is that you want to get rid of investigative teams. You want to get rid of people that are recovering stories and actually can go out and find out what stories are going on out there and get the news that we need. There's not much of that anymore. So there are some surveys that she brings up here that 89% of students reported using ChatGPT on a homework assignment. 5% of journalists report using AI in the workforce. According to Forbes, 48% of surveyed students admitted that using ChatGPT for an at-home test or quiz, 53% had it to write an essay, 22% had it to write an outline for a paper. Listen, I use it. I use Google Gemini and ChatGPT. But I put a lot of input in there, and I also proofread. Like that's a responsible thing to do. So she writes and continues to say that we have to yet see the long-term effects of AI in academic institutions, but it's beginning to reshape teaching methods. While AI does hold potential to serve as an educational tool, its integration to classrooms must be approached with caution. To foster genuine human thought and drive meaningful change, it is crucial to establish boundaries that prevent over-reliance on AI tools. I agree with that. I do agree with that. Autumn Clark, she's freshman of majoring in broadcast and digital journalism. I appreciate her story. I appreciate her contribution. And I appreciate she's also following along with this. But Autumn, I'm going to just tell you, being in news and radio and television and podcasting over 30 years, you have to understand that, yes, local journalism, they're getting the shaft right now. You want local journalism, it's going to be tough. But deregulation that was allowed so that so many companies could be bought by only a handful of companies. We see it in radio, we see it in music, we see it in television, we see it in all of our big corporate media companies that have multiple outlets of media, whatever it is. It's all failing because of the fact that the digital disruption, the internet has turned everything on its head, all of it, and there's no answer for it. But as we said, we already know that a number of publications out there, maybe not the most largest outlets out there, but we know that there are a lot of stories that you see now more today that are being generated with AI. Story from Poynter Institute. They talk about the fact that ESPN now has started deciding to use AI to write some game stories. We'd call it an agate, if you want to say, right? So it gives you the box score, gives you basically the information on the stories that are out there of what happened at a game or whatever, and they just add the information that's going on, and it just spits it out. So ESPN made an announcement a couple weeks ago. They would use AI to write game recap notes for the Premier Lacrosse League and the National Women's Soccer League. And ESPN is making the case that AI helps to cover underserved sports, leagues that ESPN currently does not fully cover with flesh and blood sports writers. So this argument seems to be using that AI to cover sports or leagues is better than not covering them at all. ESPN makes the point saying that the AI-generated recaps aim to enhance coverage of underserved sports, providing fans with content that was previously unavailable. And it will be clear which stories will be generated by AI. At the top of the story, where the traditional byline would be, will say ESPN generative AI services. And there will be a tagline also, creating recaps from event data or transcripts that are reviewed by human editors before posting. That plan's already in effect. New York Times publisher A.G. Sulzberger wrote an essay earlier this month about the quiet war against press freedoms for the United States. And he's been studying about how press freedoms have been attacked in places like Hungary, India, and Brazil. Countries may be different, but the playbooks are the same, including things like sowing distrust in the media, normalizing harassment of journalists, exploiting the courts to effectively impose additional logistical and financial penalties on disfavored journalism, and using the levers of power not to just punish independent journalists, but to also reward those who fully demonstrate fealty to their leadership. Yeah, all this manipulation is going on. That's all these things that we're working about right now that the tech companies don't want to be a part of. But journalists get caught up in that. These companies get caught up in that, which is why, again, I appreciate why the tech AI companies are keeping them outside. And that's what you should do. So one story that came out this week from the Neiman Lab, they talk about journalists, some that have decided to go and stay in journalism, but because of what's going on right now, they're also leaving. A recent published study in journalism practice from Dr. Claudia Mellado, a professor at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso, Chile, asks what brings journalists joy in their work. And perhaps more important, why journalists leave is understanding what encourages them to stay. So they say that journalists found joy in exercising service-oriented roles of journalism and in opportunities for camaraderie. There were interviews with 20 journalists across the United States asked about the joyful experiences in their work. And they went to a various number of outlets: Charlotte Observer, Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Robsonian, Fansided, and ESPN. The day-to-day work of news, they said, journalists remind us, was the opportunity to learn for a living. And what they learned often reminded them that humanity offers stories of conflict, yes, but also stories of forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. They said the joy of journalism was not just in work, but also in their workplace. So right now I want to go and bring up what's the other disruptor that has been going on for, years now, is social media. Again, almost 20 years now we're having it because YouTube has been around that long. So Facebook and YouTube right now, they outpace all of the social media sites as places where Americans regularly get news. About a third of U.S. adults say they regularly get news on each of these two sites. Also, people get their news on Instagram, 20%, 17% on TikTok, X, 12%. And there are other sites out there, including Reddit, Nextdoor, Snapchat, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, True Social, and Rumble. This is from the Pew Research Center, by the way. And they have, as an overall role, over half of U.S. adults say they at least get sometimes news from social media, up slightly compared to one of the last few years, 54% now. And it continues to go up. Some social media sites stand out as destinations for news among many of their users. 59% of X users get news there. Also, the same will get their news from True Social, 57%. And 14% of LinkedIn users regularly get news on their platform. About half of TikTok users say they regularly get news on the site, up from 43% in 2023 and just 22% in 2020. Same thing goes for rises in news gathering and news information that people are going to on YouTube and Instagram. One final story I got to talk about, which I couldn't help but leave it last. Odyssey, the radio company that is in the middle of its bankruptcy, they're trying to go ahead and get the FCC to decide on their exit plan to approve. So the FCC is near a decision on this. They're prepared to approve Odyssey's pending bankruptcy reorganization plan. So right now, Odyssey has 3 votes needed to clear the path to exit Chapter 11. But the Communications Daily reports at least one of the 2 Republicans on the FCC will vote against the plan, catching the attention of conservatives for the involvement of a fund that has ties to progressive billionaire George Soros. So there's some political stuff going on with that. Now, the FCC has greenlit other arrangements in recent years for radio groups out of their bankruptcies, which include iHeartMedia, Cumulus Media, Univision, and Alpha Media, among others. If the commission were to reject Odyssey's plan, it would be the first time since the doors were open to more overseas investment in broadcasting in 2013 that a deal did not meet with its approval. And Odyssey is trying to work out an agreement with its lenders to extend the dates on their interim financing. The loans the company had been using to run operations since filings for bankruptcy are set to mature August 19th. They've been working on a deal with the lenders to extend the loans through September 30th, preserving the status quo while awaiting an FCC decision. They're banking on the FCC to go and approve. what a wonderful thought would be if the FCC said no. And I would love to go and implore the FCC to go ahead and take that precedent. I'm serious. FCC, I'm not here for any political kind of thing, but like I'm saying, I want you to go ahead and make a lesson out of these radio companies, especially one like Odyssey that's in debt. Go ahead. Decline their decision. Overwhelming on the votes. Let's see what happens. And see what Odyssey has to go and do once they can't get their bankruptcy finalized. The FCC has some control, and they can do something like this to make these corporate radio stations start giving up and stop holding on to the debt that they do not need to be holding on to, and let the radio stations go back to the people, because the airways are belonging to us. Anyway, come back for another Broadcasters Podcast. Remember, the content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.